Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering the third book in the Dark Elf Trilogy, Sojourn. This copy is from 1991. And I got it free. This is one of those books in my used book collection where I got it from a family member instead of from a bookstore. This is the first printing, 1991, May. It's an interesting book because it's very different thematically from the first two books in this trilogy. The first book sets the stage for Drizzt Do'Urden. It shows what his birthplace is like and his birth culture is like, while showing his inner thoughts and his difficulties with coming to grips with the evil that infects his birthplace. It is a supremely xenophobic culture that he lives in. The first book is about finding the courage to get out of a terrible situation. The second book is more about found family. Drizzt Do'Urden is in exile, he is living in the wilderness, and eventually he does what most Drow do not do, which is that he becomes friends with someone. And then he spends the book trying to find home within a dangerous place. The Underdark is incredibly dangerous to live in. Everything wants to kill everything else there, and there's no real benevolent societies that he's able to find that are willing to accept him. And even traveling with friends is not sufficient for a life that will last multiple centuries. And so the first book is about the xenophobia and that terrible birthplace, that terrible culture he's born into. The second book is about finding family, finding friends, despite hardship. The third book combines those two as a stage being set. Drizzt Do'Urden is now on the surface of Faerun, which is a major continent in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting in Dungeons and Dragons. And what he's doing is trying to find a safe place to live in, despite very reasonable reservations towards his kind from everyone that lives on the surface. Drow are supremely xenophobic and racist towards everything else. They believe themselves to be masters of the Underdark, and they kill anything they can that does not serve their purpose, and there is no purpose in their society for a fairy elf, as they call them, the lighter-skinned surface elves specifically. So with that mindset ingrained in Drow, the reverse is ingrained in the surface. Drow are never to be trusted. There's never a good Drow. They will use any subterfuge, any tool they can to deceive so that they can meet their goal. And in this case, anyone reasonable that he encounters would expect that he is a spy or a liar who is only befriending them so that he can eventually stab them in the back. Those are the odds that Drizzt Do'Urden is up against. And so it's a book about racism. It's a book about opening hearts to the possibility of someone being not what they seem to be. And in a way that's very trite, it shouldn't be a big leap in logic, but it is in this setting. And there are, in this setting, good Drow that escape their civilization. but they are incredibly few in number, and they are almost exclusively female who worship a specific goddess. Agnostic male drow don't really exist in this setting, not away from home, away from birthplace. That being said, Dritz Do'Urden is hunted throughout the book by a bounty hunter who eventually accepts that it's not really about the bounty, it's more about personal pride. He's never let someone get away, or he's never taken a job where someone gets away from him. And now there is a drow that seemingly can get away from him, and he will hunt that drow to the ends of the earth to keep his record steady. It kind of hurts to see the main character go through this, because he's incredibly naive in this trilogy. He's young and he's foolish, and he likes to hope that there is a modicum of acceptance in people's hearts that he has for them. That if he can grow up in the most evil of societies and come out on the straight and narrow, that others can accept him for what he is rather than what they think he is. And that's incredibly naive, especially in a world where he is not very strong. So he does what he can to protect people. He does what he can to find home. Eventually this culminates in him finding a blind mentor. This mentor takes care of Dritz and trains him in the ways of the woodland rangers, and then helps him by putting in a good word to the more powerful, good-natured people in the area. That this mentor is approving of Dritz Do'Urden is enough for most of the powerful individuals to accept that he is what he claims to be. A drow that is just trying to find friends and family and home on the surface without being hounded to the ends of the earth. And if you know the character, then the ending doesn't come too much as a surprise. He does find home. It is in Icewind Dale, which this trilogy is written after the first trilogy, which is the Icewind Dale trilogy, but is chronologically set before that. And in the Icewind Dale trilogy, Dritz Do'Urden is in a land of misfits, outcasts, exiles, criminals, and people who are just struggling to make a living. And when everyone's got a bounty on their head in some other nation, you start to accept people as potentially worthwhile. You keep everyone at an arm's length, but you still accept them. And so when he gets to Icewind Dale, no one will even accept him into the gates of the town, but say, you can go on to the other town or the next town, and they might accept you. And what Dritz at this point says is that everything he's heard about Icewind Dale is that they will accept any exile or outcast, but if this is how the population center in this region treats him, then the smaller populations, the villages and the smaller towns will treat him even worse. And the spokesperson accepts that argument and says, as spokesperson for this town, I can't go against the will of the people, but I understand what you're saying. There's not much I can do for you. Maybe find a home in the wilderness near here, and we'll keep you at arm's length, but we will not hunt you down. And honestly, that's about as much as Dritz Do'Urden can expect at this time. And so he does go off into the wilderness, tries to make somewhat of a home of the great icy north, and he meets a dwarf that is willing to accept him as a tentative ally. That if my adopted human daughter is willing to give you a fair shake, then I should as well, and I can try to be as good a role model for her as I can. And so Brainer Battlehammer, this dwarf, accepts his new neighbor. In the Icewind Dale trilogy, especially in The Crystal Shard, the first book in the trilogy, he's still held at arm's length, he is still kept back, but he is somewhat trusted by Brainer. He is a friend, but one that he can't be too open with because he is the leader of dwarves, and these dwarves may not accept him, accept Dritz Do'Urden, and accept Brainer Battlehammer's leadership if they see him openly consorting with a drow. And eventually, Dritz Do'Urden is regarded as a hero in the northern part of the Sword Coast of Faerun. Eventually, he makes it to a point where even commoners assume, oh, there is a drow with 2 scimitars wandering into town. It must be this hero that I've heard stories about, and not keep him at the end of a pitchfork, at the end of a spear, and don't let him into town. So that's what Sojourn leads into, is encountering xenophobia from the surface, but then seeing that the surface is more readily accepting of others than the Underdark, and that he may not always find a friend as good as his gnome from exile, but he will find people that will at least give him a fair shake. And that's what this book does. And that's why I didn't really include it in the other video. The first 2 are more about setting the stage for why Dritz Do'Urden gets the treatment he does in Sojourn. So, yeah, I liked it. As you can see, it's pretty beaten up. I got this when it was a full cover, and, you know, like I said, I didn't pay for it, but, I mean, it has that older book smell. It's funny because it says on the back cover, from the publishers of the Dragonlance saga. It then says at the bottom, Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms are registered trademarks owned by TSR Inc. Trademark. Designates other trademarks owned by TSR Inc. 1991. And then all that, all rights reserved and all that. This is a point at which the Forgotten Realms are not as well known or as ubiquitous in the fantasy gaming sphere as they are now. So Dragonlance was much more popular in the 80s and 90s than the Forgotten Realms, which is why Dritz Do'Urden's trilogy is advertised as from the publishers of the Dragonlance saga, because Dragonlance was the backbone of the D&D fantasy story sphere, so to speak. Nowadays, that's completely flipped. The Forgotten Realms books are far more popular, far better known, but granted, in the last decade, for basically all of the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, publishing hasn't been a major concern for Wizards of the Coast, and so not too many books have been made, except for the most pivotal of characters, Elminster and Dritz Do'Urden being the foremost. So, yeah, that is Sojourn. Those are my opinions on the Dark Elf Trilogy. Please check out the other 2 videos I've done about this character, and I promise you I will get to other used books next weekend, books that have nothing to do with the Forgotten Realms. So, yeah. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.